Hey, everybody. Today's Tuesday, right?
It is Tuesday.
Welcome. Yeah. I don't know whether I'm coming or going. I'm Haley Gray. I'm the group owner of the Women's Entrepreneur Network, and I have one of our amazing One Live presenters and just an amazing marketer, copywriter, marketing strategist, copywriting strategist, just person that you really need to know.
Can you
And I
follow
want to
me
welcome.
around? I like this.
I can follow you around with signs and say, Erin is amazing.
Yeah, I
You
like
need
that.
to know Erin. You need to know Erin. Yeah. And, a lot of times people think that I exist in a vacuum, and nothing could be further from the truth. So, Erin, welcome, because we're going to talk about raising your hand. Y'all raise your hand if you feel like a lot of your copywriting has been a total disaster. And I will raise my both hands in the air like I don't care, because
and I'll do it too, right? Like whether it's your own copy,
sucked at copywriting. Yeah.
Whether it's your copy, whether you're hiring a copywriter, and I say this as a copywriter, right? I've had the projects that have gone really, really well. Most of them go really, really well at this point because I have figured out what I need to be doing. But a lot of times, copywriters will be talking, in their secret dark rooms in our caves, talking about like, man, why was this project a total disaster? What could I have done better? And sometimes it's just not a fit. Like, let's address the elephant in the room. Sometimes it's not a fit, whether it's skills, knowledge, personalities. Sometimes things just don't mesh. But when you're hiring a copywriter, there's a lot of times when people will come to me, and I think you've probably said this to me too. It's like, man, they're just not getting it. And sometimes it is the copywriter's fault. Sometimes it is the client's fault. And more often than not, it's just a lack of clarity and being on the same page about goals, voice, priorities, all of the above. And so a lot of customers who have been in marketing, and those that don't, set out and they're like, I'm going to create a creative brief so they know exactly what to do, which is great. Like, creative briefs are essential, and I don't think enough people do them. But I also don't think that they're as necessary as making sure that, hey, we know what your mission is. We know who your audience is. We know what your goals are. We know how you want to come across. We know what matters most to your audience, like on and on and on. And it's like all of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
You know this for yourself. You know this for most of your clients too. Like, in the end, something about those drafts and managing it and understanding expectations and understanding the process, something that's missed along the way.
Yeah. Well, and one of the challenges I run into as a digital marketer, as somebody who writes copy for other people, builds websites, does branding, all of the things, is a lot of times when I go through and I start asking the questions, the business owner will give me an A. I don't know the answer to that. I don't feel like answering that, and that makes it really, really hard to get the voice right, to get the messaging right, to get the audience right. Because let's face it, not every single realtor serves the same audience. Not every same restaurant serves the same audience. So just because I've worked with 20 other general contractors doesn't mean that I understand your exact business model if you don't take the time to answer the questions for me.
Or a lot of the times I find that in these intakes, and I never expect people to answer the intakes perfectly. I hate them myself. I hate filling out intakes. By the way, yes, copywriter, going on record saying I hate filling them out too, because it is hard to quantify some of that. You as a business person are hiring me to help you figure this out. So I'm accustomed to seeing these 1-2 word answers or these blanks. But I think, even if people have some kind of an inclination, that's a starting point, we can then have a discussion. So,
well, and that's where we start and we have the discussion, and then we do a call and we go through this, and that can get pretty expensive, right? doing that all one-to-one and time consuming and doing all the things.
It can, but I don't think that there is a complete substitute for it, because how can you dive into this? It's like you either, in my opinion, you either spend the time up front doing it, or you spend the time in countless rounds of revisions that leave everyone insanely frustrated. And it's challenging as busy business owners to make the time. It's challenging to do it. So, it is a little bit of a catch-22, but there are some things that you can do, whether you're hiring a copywriter or whether you're a copywriter who is like, I am so tired of every project feeling like it's going sideways. We set these goals, we set these timelines, and no one's adhering to them. But on the flip side, customers or clients, however you want to refer to yourself, are feeling the pinch too, because they're like, man, we've been through 6 rounds. They said it was 2 and they haven't charged me more, or maybe they have, but when is the end in sight? What is it? So I think part of it's just knowing how to set up the project for success and doing so in a documentation so that someone can refer back to it. Even if it's Loom, right? You can always, what's the word I'm looking for? You can always not transduce, but it's transcribe it. Why is that a hard word for me today? But you can always transcribe it and then extract the things that are important. But what do you do that? How do you manage that? How do you manage it when you work with copywriters?
So I actually have the mother of all questionnaires that I sit down from a marketing perspective, and I try to understand who is your audience, what is your mission, what are your goals with this marketing, what are we trying to do? What are we trying to do in this phase of our marketing? Because marketing can have phases. What is our overall plan? Sometimes if a client just comes to me and they're like, oh, I need to redo blah, blah, blah. A lot of times it's like, take a step back and do that analysis of who are your competitors? What are your SEO keywords? What are all these things? And doing that planning before we start doing their stuff. Otherwise, there's no way any of it's going to succeed.
Well, I think that's just it. Like, a lot of times I have a client in particular that I'm thinking of. They're like, can you write these things for us? And it's like, yes, absolutely.
Can I? Yes.
Tell me more about the audience. Tell me more about these things. And I think I gave them 3 or 4 questions, and each one was answered in 3 or 4 emails, as opposed to like even one per question. And it's like, we don't have a cohesive vision of who we're selling to. We don't have a cohesive vision. She had it internally. She had it in her head. But it's like, yes, and the copy deck can help with some of that. But the more complex your organization, the more concise your documentation has to be. And that's getting us a little, I think, off track. But to your point, that if you don't have the strategy first and you don't agree on the strategy first, then you're just throwing darts at a dartboard and hoping that you get somewhere close to center.
Well, and it's even so much as like, and I'm not going to sit here and lie and say, hey, you have to have that perfect ideal candidate and that ideal client, avatar all completely filled out. And, it's a 23-year-old woman, blah, 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 with 4 children. Because honestly, that's not really information that's available to small businesses for the most part. But you do need to know your general audience. And I've had, like conversations with chiropractors. Well, who do you serve? Oh, I serve everybody with a spine. No, really, who makes up the bulk of your patients? If you were to look at that 80-20 rule, where do 80% of your patients lie? Oh, they're women that are ages 45 to 50. And then suddenly you get that like
boom. Well, and it's hard to
maybe
do that.
your verbiage.
Deep thinking. It's deep thinking that you don't, it's like, well, I don't really, it's like there is someone. There's always something. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And so once we have these conversations, how do you codify that to make sure that people are
right?
And I'm not trying to put you on the spot, by the way, because
we create internal documents, right? And if I'm doing a marketing plan for somebody, then they get a copy of all of those documents. And certainly if somebody does a questionnaire, then they have a copy of all of that information. But the reality is that it's really hard. And especially as a business owner, I would say probably 90 to 95% of our customers don't have any of that information, or don't really know that information, or, even simple stuff like, hey, what are your fonts and hex codes for your colors? Now, I'm sorry, I had somebody who printed a business card for me 14 eons ago, and here's kind of what we have. Yay.
Well, and the other side of it too is that they're like, oh, that's a really good question. And it's interesting to see, but it's like, well, what's your general inclination? Can we talk through this? So, I mean, I think that speaks to the importance of onboarding, as tempting as it can be to just say, yeah, I can whip this up for you in like a week. Very rarely are the deadlines that firm. More often than not, it's, if it's not close to what's exactly right, they're going to push back anyway. So it's absolutely worth pushing it back a day or two, as long as there's not a specific thing that they have to launch for. And then it's like, okay, what can we do? What's the low-hanging fruit that we can do to get this to a minimum viable point? And then you can move forward. But you still need some kind of a coming to accordance on things. So what I use is a copy deck. And even recently, I can tell you what that is, because when I first heard about it, I'm like, who's the what? What's that? And then I realized it's very close to the document that I was already using to manage this internally. But my brain is going 42 directions at once. Of course, that's how my brain works. But
that's the answer to life, the universe, and everything.
It is 42. That must be why I like it. But what's interesting is a client recently came to me with a creative brief, and they're like, oh, well, we don't need your deck because we've got all the information here. And then we comb through, and it's like, there's actually not all the information here. So it's quite interesting. And a copy deck, simply put, is a document that sets the goals for the copy, for the project, outlines basics about what you want to cover, and it sets the stage for how you're going to manage the project so that it does have very clear expectations. Actually, Google Documents, I don't know if you've seen this, they have a super cool new feature that lets you track changes. And it's not their normal track changes. It's like an approval management process that is very, very cool. And you can customize it based on what your process is. But by putting that in the document, it makes it very, very easy to set expectations. Whether you have a blog, whether it's an email, whether your copy project is website copy, whether it's a sales page, no matter what it is, because you can get clear on these X things. And depending on your flow, you can get them to sign off on it and say, yes, this is accurate. No, this is not accurate. But sometimes, especially when it's your project, it's just as important to have it, because it's so easy, and we've both done this, to stare at a blank screen, blank document, and be like, I don't know what to write. And so having something there gives you a jumping off point. And then you can write everything you write through the lenses that you've put forward in that document. You're like, oh, yes, this relates to all of that. Yeah. And so that's my, yeah.
And I think that anything you can do to, break up I'm staring at a blank document and I don't even know where to start. In my world, it's okay, so I don't even know where to start with your branding. And branding, message, and copywriting tend to go a lot together, like peanut butter and jelly. But anything you can do to break the cycle is good. And anything you can do to establish that like norm, especially, in the case where, hey, I'm getting ready to hand off copy to somebody else. How do I want to sound? Do I want to sound slapstick and funny, or do I want to sound professional? And what kind of voice do I use? Do I use highly technical jargon, or do I use everyday words to explain highly technical concepts? And
do I want to feel approachable? Do I want to, if I'm talking to PhD scientists who know all this stuff, you don't want to waste time explaining all these terms. But if you're talking to, I mean, even if you're talking to people who understand this, it also has to relate often to people who have very rudimentary working knowledge. So in addition to your jargon, I guess you also have to focus on what's their jargon. What are the words that they use? What's going to make sense?
Well, and what their knowledge level is. I had this conversation with a client this morning on a mastermind call because we were talking about, well, you know, when you start talking about things that you take for granted in your business as being like the baseline, the interesting thing is that for most people, that baseline is non-existent. They don't have any exposure to your industry, your field, whatever. So not only are you having to establish, you know, your credibility, but they don't even know what the heck you're talking about. So you're assuming, you know, like, you know, say you're talking about sports, that other people understand things about sports that they may not. I'll give you a perfect example. I didn't grow up in the US.
I did not know
that. So I understand soccer very well. I love basketball. I went to NC State and Duke. And I've been to a few American football games, but I have no concept of how the game is actually played for American football. None. I don't understand the rules. I don't understand any of it. And so like when I'm talking to clients, you know, sometimes I have to explain that, look, I understand that I sound and I look and, you know, I come off as very educated and understanding things, but you have to understand that my background is not necessarily somebody who was raised in the United States. And I don't have that background with American football.
Well, just one example. You say that, like where I grew up, football was only a big sport if it was a big sport in your household. It was not a thing. We had a high school team, but it was just not a big thing. And then I married someone who has season tickets to the Green Bay Packers within their family, and now they're ours. But I have learned a whole lot about football, and it's interesting. Like, it's just, they're like, well, didn't you grow up here? And it's like, well, no, but also I had a totally different experience.
Right. And
football is the analogy, but yeah.
Yeah, but football is a great analogy because there are people who are total fans. And then there's the rest of us who are like, And in my married life, my husband's not a huge football fan. I mean, we'll go to like college football, but it's not something where I actually even understand the rules of the game.
It's less about the game and more about the event and being there, probably. That's what I love about college games.
Yeah.
And if we're writing something about this, it's like, how can we put football into terms that matter to someone who has no point of reference or minimal point of reference, or where football is the point of reference?
Where, you know, I grew up playing soccer on the streets in Rio de Janeiro. Well, I have a very slightly different perspective of what football means.
I did not know that. We have to talk more about
because strange background, right?
I have questions. You know, yes,
you have questions, but
I have questions.
it goes back to that, you know, like when you start talking copy deck. Well, who are you targeting? And understanding that the people on the other end may not even understand the language you're using, even if you're speaking English.
Right. Well, and I think even copywriters who've been doing this for a while. I was in a group and someone was like, you know, I've been doing this for 20 years and someone asked me for one for the first time. And now I'm like, what the heck am I supposed to do here? And so it's interesting that more and more people who hire copywriters are starting to request them. And I think, honestly, there's no right way to do one. There's no wrong way to do one, but there's always ways to level it up so that it's a much better experience for everyone. But I think probably the number one benefit of having them is it allows you to reframe, you as the copywriter, to reframe to the business owner what you think that they've said. So even if you, the business owner, creates one of these, you may think that you're being incredibly clear. Again, to that point of it's up in here, it feels clear to you, but there still may be holes. So it can serve as a really interesting onboarding conversation, though, to get clear in it. Well, this, but not this. Well, what about this? Well, see, in American football, only one person can throw the ball. which I don't think is
right.
fairly accurate, but it's darn close.
Right.
Yeah. Whereas in rugby, you throw
And
it
it
back.
doesn't involve, actually kicking the ball hardly ever.
Right. Right.
And you're only going to kick it in certain instances, and it's only really one person who kicks it.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's so interesting. So interesting.
Right. But if you think about, language and language choice and trying to connect with your audience, and then you realize this is why a lot of times copy totally misses.
It doesn't connect. Yeah. And with that said, no matter how prepared you are, no matter how much each individual person loves it, whether it's me thinking, hey, this is awesome, and you're like, this doesn't really speak to me, or more importantly, it doesn't speak to your audience. It's like, cool, what about it doesn't land right? Because the other aspect of this is figuring out how to give feedback in a way that's productive. And even with that, even if it's a perfect project where I create something, you love it, your clients love it, if it's not converting, then it's still there's still always a method.
Then it's still not the right copy, right?
But it gives you a point where you can come back and say, I see, here's where we missed. And then from there you can iterate and make it better.
Yeah. Well, and that's where having that transparency of communication, that documentation, the nuances there. And, for me, I don't take offense if somebody doesn't like a particular image or a particular style or whatever. Right. I can only guess what you wanted, and I can make the most beautiful website, logos, funnel in the world. You can write the most stunning copy, but it doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily convert. We can all agree that it's aesthetically pleasing or whatever. Oh my gosh, that's such a great story, but it doesn't do a darn thing for conversions. Okay, right. Now what do we need to really do?
Now what didn't land? Where does this? And so there's always a methodology that is iterative. There's always nothing exists in a vacuum. What lands perfectly today won't land perfectly next week, or it might not. What landed really well in January 2020 did not land well in May 2020. Sometimes it's people shifting and sometimes it's outside events. So I think just being cognizant of that. And I think it's really interesting. It's always really interesting to see how different people work and different working styles and how you can come together.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell me about this workshop that you are doing.
So because I think copy decks are essential for a successful copy project, whether again it's your own or something that you're doing for hire or something that you're hiring someone else for, a copy deck helps you get on the right page. Because of that, I am going into greater detail on what they are, how to use them, the key elements in a free training. I believe you have the link in the comments here.
I have already posted it in the description, but I'm going to post it in the comments for where it actually is.
Amazing. Well, thank you. And so we're going to dive into that. And it's also kicking off an August cohort for my course Womp Womp to Wow, which is designed to help people write their own website copy. And until now, we haven't focused heavily on copy decks, but it is going to be one of the trainings moving forward. So I wanted to deliver it to everyone free of charge so that you can see what it looks like, get a feel for what these modules might look like, get a feel for what the worksheets might look like. And everyone who comes walks away with my templates that I use so that you can use them for yourself. You can take them, make them your own and say, this is working. This isn't relevant to me. Why am I even bothering with this? So
that's cool.
But I think having a starting point, like you said, no blank documents.
Yeah. And no staring at blank sheets.
Right.
And the cursor just kind of randomly blinking at you going, I am tormenting you.
And then it's like, oh, look, there's a flower outside that fell. I'm going to go pick that up. And then you come back and you're never
still hasn't changed.
It's still sitting there blinking at you. Yeah.
Yep. Totally. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me here, and we'll talk.
We'll do it soon. Take care.
Bye.
Y'all, take care. Have a good afternoon.